It was a dreary day, Janet remembers, when the scent of snow was nearing. Outside, chained to his post, Neville barked continuously until his mistress came to his call, finding him with his front paws upon the hood of her car. "Can't you wait until my soap opera is over before we go for a ride?" she asked, recognizing his signal, but Neville's responding bark was different, more commanding than before, and she obliged his wish immediately. She drove with no particular intent of direction, and Neville was seated next to her, watching the road intensely as if he himself were driving. The further they drove from home, the more observant Neville seemed to become, turning his head at every street sign they passed, as if he were reading them, while they continued down the old access road. Janet subconsciously noticed the air smelled sour of cider vinegar, and the apple blossoms came to mind, as they did the last time she traveled this road. She reconstructed the day for Neville, remembering how angry she was, and how the sign distracted her, and how it seemed now to be a sign of fate. To her astonishment, that sign was still hanging on the post, or so it appeared to be, the same but weathered from the summer months. She mentioned to him that maybe they should take a drive to his old home and show the elderly man what a striking dog the runt was turning out to be, and Neville answered with a short, low growl of approval. To her surprise, the old house stood no longer. All that remained was the foundation it had once sat upon, and a charred barn toward the back of the lot. Not even the rust-eaten truck was there, or at least not where she could see. The orchard, however, seemed untouched, still creating the cradling form that it had when the house was there. Janet went back down the road and asked the residents of the other home about the events that had taken place at 666 Neville Grove Lane, but they were not able to answer her. They seemed frightened of her, for some unknown reason, and fidgeted when lying about being busy in the household. Janet took it to mean, as like the old man had, they hadn't any call for people. Maybe that's just the way it was with the orchard growers who lived on roads with no neighbors near to chat or make friends with. Maybe these people preferred privacy, and that's why they moved to such a deserted community. Winter came in like a raging bull, covering the entire town with 4 feet of snow and ice. It was an event that had never happened in Devondale, Wisconsin before, and came very suddenly overnight without warning. When the townspeople woke this morning, they sensed the eerie silence, as if the town had become one giant cocoon. Alarm clocks never woke their owners, the toasters wouldn't brown the breads and bagels, and the coffee pots stayed silent due to downed electricity lines. They could not even call to report the malfunctions, as their phone lines too were out of commission. All the people of Devondale could do was wait it out and hope the confinement wouldn't last for very long. Janet couldn't wait it out like the others because she was trapped inside a house that was turning into an oven. The thermostat read 89 degrees the last time she looked. No matter what she tried, the oil furnace would not shut down. Because of the warmth inside and the cold outside, all exits were frozen shut. She was trapped and nary a breeze inside to cool her. Opening the refrigerator and freezer would only spoil what contents she may desperately need if a thaw didn't come soon. But as with most things lately, Janet tried to make the best of a bad situation and kept herself occupied with the many books she'd collected over the years but had never a chance to read. Neville never closed his eyes once, staying focused only on his mistress, who sat naked on the sofa, fanning herself with a magazine while thumbing through pictures in a book. With nothing better to do, and while Neville was sitting still for once, she tried to get some idea of what combination of breeds he was. The best she could come up with was the body of a boxer and Great Dane, but his head was of something else. It was broad, but not like a boxer, yet sleek, and the dark brown fur around his neck, especially at the back, was longer than all the rest, clashing with his overall coat of golden tan. "I give up," she declared and closed the book. "I don't know why you can't come out and just tell me what you are, Neville. Besides, just sitting here is making me bored, and as silly as it sounds, I need to move around for nothing else but a breeze. If you were a gentleman, you would let me borrow that corner for a bit. What have you to say about that?" He watched as she stood and stretched but didn't offer much more than a couple drooling pants, then licked his damp chops dry. Yeah, the typical male. It's probably just as well you don't speak, or you'd have me fetching your beers and cooking up a feast, huh? He watched his mistress as she walked out of the room, heard her in the ice bin, then the plops when dropping the cubes into his bowl of water. He next heard a cupboard door open, and the rustle of objects being withdrawn and placed onto the linoleum floor. Maybe it was time to investigate what had broken the silence. As Janet stated, she was tired of sitting and decided to get a head start on spring cleaning. A chore she hadn't had time to be thorough with since buying her house 7 years ago. Hell, she'd always been too busy at work and never had a chance to get organized, tossing her belongings anywhere just to get them out of sight. She heard Neville lapping at his water. Maybe this season she could become organized and fix her house like a home, especially if the snow kept coming. Maybe after all that she would finally feel like a homeowner and like this was her castle. Neville crunched the ice cubes noisily in his powerful jaws. And maybe someday she would find her prince and finally get married. There was always that possibility. After all, she was still climbing that mountain. Now, had you asked her this before she dropped the 50+ pounds, she surely would have argued the point, then drowned her sorrow in a bag of M&Ms as she bitched out on the sofa with negative thoughts. Neville, stop that, she giggled, feeling his cold breath on her raised bare ass. Maybe there was still hope yet for Janet Yardley. Maybe some night, once the town thawed out, she would make a trip to the local tavern to see what was available. She had noticed some striking men around her age walking the downtown area. Some even dressed in three-piece suits. Wouldn't that be a switch, she said aloud, her voice echoing inside the empty cupboard. Me hooking up with the real businessman type. She stood and rinsed the dish rag at the sink, then looked around to locate what the quiet Neville was up to. She found him sitting at the edge of the counter, still watching her every move. That ice cool you down, boy? She asked while wringing out the rag and heard him reply with a whiny yawn. Just as she leaned into the vacant cupboard once again, she felt one of his paws pat at her back. No, I don't feel like playing right now, she told him and shrugged him away, or so she thought. Again he placed his mammoth paw to her back, this time distributing more weight. She tried to move but couldn't. She felt something long, hot, and sticky slide down the crack of her derriere, then between her legs. Neville. Bad dog, Neville, she scolded him firmly, but it didn't seem to bother him one bit. She tried to buck him away, but his weight was too much for the position she was in. No. No. Neville, no, she kept shouting, but he continued sliding his slippery red tool back and forth within her dampening trench until he found his target, then plunged himself with a hearty thrust and distributed the rest of his weight against her back. Janet was not sure how to handle such a situation. Perhaps she should have read the articles in the book instead of just looking at the pictures. Trying the calm approach, she said softly, Neville, let me up, please. You must let me up right now so we can play. Yes, that's it. Go get your squeaky toy and we'll play catch, okay? He wasn't buying it, and snorted another cool breeze, aimed at her ear. Oh, Neville, look. Out the window, Neville. Kitty. Kitty. Go get the kitty. He didn't even budge. Janet realized just how thankful she was that everyone was snowed in and that no one would be looking in her window right now. That sure would give the townspeople something to gab about. The thought struck her funny, imagining herself as the window peeper and looking in to see such a pornographic sight. The more she visualized it, the harder she laughed, and her body began to quake. Neville took her motions as a form of instructions and began humping the body beneath him. First slowly, adjusting himself within, then more rapidly as he became familiar with her feminine construction. She knew it was wrong, but in a way it felt good. Had she known a dog could do such an act, maybe she would have been more selective and chosen one thicker in circumference. Oh, that was sick. She yelled to herself at the thought, but continued to laugh out loud, nearly wetting herself in the hilarity of it all. Neville's hot drool dripped onto her back as he continued riding her. Within a couple minutes he began to whimper, and she began to prepare herself for his climax. As indecent as it sounded in her mind, she had to admit that she too was reaching her peak. The louder Neville moaned, the more she began to push her torso with his, sinking his red rod deeper and deeper until she felt his sacks knock like bags of sand between her widely spread legs. "Oh, Neville," she commented between panting breaths, "I sure hope the snow's cleared by Sunday so I can go to church before I burn in hell for this." His paw slid from her back and grasped her around the middle, then gave her the final few thrusts before emptying himself inside his mistress. He then laughed at the puddle of his own drool from her back as his limb hugged her tightly. Regardless of the heat that continued to seep through every vent, Janet refused to walk around her home in the buff again. 4 days had passed since their rendezvous in the kitchen, and she remembered it shamefully, as if it had only just happened. She was even finding it hard to look at her dog without the memory of how she felt. Still, she couldn't forget how disgustingly good it felt being screwed by her own animal, and that bothered her, especially since they were still snowed in, along with the rest of the town. And heaven forbid she should catch Neville clean himself for fear of emitting a reminiscent moan. Someone had walked through the front yard, delivering flyers to all the people, letting them know the Red Cross was there, should they need assistance. She found this rather absurd because if no one was to go outside, or be able to, how in the hell were they supposed to signal for help? Smoke signals, maybe, from the chimney. Still the phone lines were down, though some of the electricity had been restored in certain areas for certain amounts of time at night, and luckily, she was one of the fortunate ones. What food she could salvage from the fridge was nearly gone. Gee, maybe old Neville will share his food with me over candlelight if I promise him a good lay afterwards, she comically thought to herself as she laid in bed reading a romance novel. Soon the lights began to flicker. She felt as if she were in prison, expecting someone soon to yell out from the corridor, "Lights out, ladies." Still the snow came down. Any that may have melted from the previous day was replenished by the next morning. Even the plows were snowed in. The entire town had stopped dead in frozen tracks of a white blanket. What information she could receive came from the battery-operated radio at night, transmitted from the nearest town, about 40 miles south. Again the lights flickered, and before she was left in the dark, she made a mad dash to the bathroom, then looked in on Neville, making sure he was in bed, then crossed the hall where she shut her bedroom door firmly, checking the catch before undressing for bed.